Okay, yeah, we're just going to start that. Hey Bio30, welcome back to another class today. We'll be talking today about the nervous system. And normally I show you guys a YouTube video to get us moving and just getting into the idea of what we'll be talking today in our topic. But in the interest of time, I'll be focusing mostly on the central nervous system and specifically about the brain, which is one of the main organs of the central nervous system. So what you'll see in front of you is probably wondering, why do I have Play-Doh? And I'll explain to you what we're doing with the Play-Doh here. We're actually going to be building our very own model of the brain. So that'll help us conceptualize the different parts and also the general anatomy of the brain. So you guys can start opening up the boxes in front of you. You'll see that you have 7 different Play-Doh colors because we're going to be covering 7 different parts of the brain with the Play-Doh. And of course, there are other parts we'll be going over as well during our lesson. But those are the 7 parts, which I'll tell you in a second, that we'll be doing with our Play-Doh model. You'll also see that you have these packages on your plates. You want to just move everything off the plates because you'll be using the plates to create your model directly on there. And inside these little packages, you have all these toothpick labels, a knife, and a popsicle stick. Just be careful with the toothpicks and the knives. You don't want to be cutting yourself, and don't wave the knife around other people's faces. It's very dangerous that way. Just be careful with those. So you can take out everything here. The popsicle stick we can put aside for now. We'll see if we have enough time to get through the lesson, and we might use the popsicle stick later. But you need the knife and the different labels. And the knife, it's for you to cut the Play-Doh into smaller pieces if you want to, or you can make a giant brain. It's really up to what you guys want to do. And it doesn't matter which color you use for each part either. I'll be using specific colors, but you guys can pick the color you want to use in that case. Okay, well, now that we've got that all out of the way, let's get started. So first off, you need to know that the brain is divided into 3 main parts. It's going to be the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And just to keep in mind, even though we're going to be doing our brain model, try to take some notes as much as you can. I will be giving you time to get your notes down and also make your brain model. And also, I will be posting these notes on our Google Classroom later today. So don't worry if you don't get everything down right away. So the forebrain is the largest part of the brain. It's made out of 4 main lobes. And our first lobe is the frontal lobe. And that's responsible for short-term memory. So for example, what you just did 20 minutes ago. And it's also responsible for planning. So when you're planning your day out, or sequencing, where you're deciding how I'm going to do things in a certain order. So let's start building our brain here. I'm going to be using my green Play-Doh here. You can take out any Play-Doh you like, just shape it to a certain flat. So you want it to be like nice and flat like that. You don't want it to be too circular. You can just flatten it out. And you're going to take your plate, and it doesn't really matter where you put this lobe because it's our first part of the brain, but I'm just going to put it at the top of my plate like this. So you can see how this sticks nice and clean like that. And once you're finished putting your lobe, your frontal lobe like that, go ahead and find your label that says frontal lobe. So here's my frontal lobe.
Or do you want to make it together?
Frontal lobe.
Wait, you gotta play with us.
That's okay. That's fine.
Yeah, you guys can work in groups. That's why we have different plates.
Play with us.
Her nails match the color.
All right. And everyone got our frontal lobes?
Frontal lobe.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, we got our frontal lobes. Amazing. Great job, guys. Yeah. Let's move on.
Temporal.
Darn. Okay, so our next lobe is the parietal lobe, and that processes somatosensory information. So how you're touching your Play-Doh right now, that's example of somatosensory info. You feel like it's Play-Doh. It's kind of squishy. It's got a certain texture to it. And it also recognizes spatial location of objects. So how I'm standing in front of the classroom, you know I'm standing here because that's my current spatial location. And now let's take out another color of the Play-Doh. Again, pick any color you'd like.
Yes.
I'm going to be using red myself. I would recommend you using different colors, otherwise it's going to be a very monocolor brain and it will be very confusing. So we're going to take our next Play-Doh and just put it to the right of the frontal lobe like that. And you can just kind of squish it so it's kind of along the outer rim of your plate here. And go ahead and find your parietal lobe marker, and you can put it into your parietal lobe. And so far we got
Dude, we're
our
so
frontal and parietal lobe. Everyone got that?
This is real Play-Doh.
Everyone doing good? Great, let's move on to the next part.
What is it called?
Okay,
Oh, that's awesome.
the temporal lobe. That's for auditory. So as I'm speaking, your ears are hearing certain words coming out of my mouth, and that's your temporal lobe telling you that you're hearing something. And for the temporal lobe, I'm just gonna take another different color now. Again, you can take whatever color you'd like. You might want to make this one a bit bigger relative to your frontal and parietal lobe. Make sure we're not throwing Play-Doh to each other, please.
Nope.
Very nice.
And go ahead and you can
Our brain's better than yours.
and go ahead and take your temporal lobe and put it right underneath your frontal and parietal lobe here.
Until the parietal lobe good.
Oh, what lobe was that?
Right
This
here.
is the temporal lobe.
Temporal.
And go ahead and find.
Guys are cheating.
Mikhail, make sure you keep it down.
Keep trying.
And go ahead and put your temporal lobe marker here.
Thank you.
Everyone got their temporal lobe?
Where's this on?
Okay, here we go. Nicely done, everyone. And our final lobe, but not least, is our occipital lobe. And that is for our vision. So as you're looking at me, that's your occipital lobe processing that information. And for our occipital lobe, I'm going to be taking my yellow Play-Doh. Again, pick out another color you guys like to use. And our occipital lobe is going to go to the right of the parietal lobe and also right beside the temporal lobe here. So as you can see, I'm going to take my occipital lobe and just put it right here so that it's kind of adjacent to the parietal and the temporal lobe. And I'm going to find my occipital lobe marker and put it right in here, like that. Everyone got their occipital lobe? Nicely done, everyone. Great, so we just covered the 4 lobes.
Someone's punchy.
And before I continue on with the rest of the forebrain, there's still 2 other important brain parts we need to talk about that's located near the temporal lobe. So quick fact check. What is the function of the temporal lobe? Anyone recall that?
Hearing.
Exactly, it's for auditory use. And that brings you to the hippocampus. It's not the hippopotamus, it's a hippocampus. And it's for learning and remembering facts and events, just like how you guys remembered that fact about the temporal lobe. And then we've got our amygdala, and that's responsible for emotional expressions like fear, pain, anger, joy, whatever emotions you feel on a daily basis. And you don't have to worry about this for our Play-Doh because you want to save our Play-Doh for other parts, but the amygdala and the hippocampus, they would actually go kind of underneath the temporal lobe here. So this would be the hippocampus, and this would be the amygdala here. So that covers those 2 parts near our temporal lobe. Let's push forward to the rest of the forebrain. The corpus callosum. It's a pretty cool name. We've actually got our brain split into 2 halves. It's 1 unit, but it's actually got a left and a right cerebral hemisphere. And so they work together, and the corpus callosum is actually like a bridge. It connects the 2 together. And it would actually go kind of right here and connect into the other half of the brain. This is our 2D brain, just keep that in mind. And I have a fun question for you guys. Who here is right-handed? Yeah? And who's left-handed here? Yeah, so we got righties and lefties.
Oh, wait.
Awesome. And,
Wait, left-handed for what?
you're left-hand dominant, so you use your left
Oh, no,
hand.
I'm right-handed.
Oh, okay. And so, based on what we learned about the brain so far, why do you think we have right-handedness or left-handedness? Yeah?
Some of us are superior to others.
Ooh.
Well,
Ooh.
that's an interesting perspective to take. On the other hand, we want to consider that different parts of the brain controls different parts of our body. So even though that our right hand might be doing something or our left hand's doing something, we do have to remember that they're not independent from each other. They actually work in tandem. And so our brain communicates the different parts. They're not separate. They work together as one functional unit. We also have the thalamus, which directs incoming sensory information to the rest of the forebrain for interpretation. So basically all that hearing, all that touching, all that feeling you get, that goes to the thalamus first before it goes to the rest of the forebrain. And finally, you've got our hypothalamus. So if you recall from your other science courses, hypo means under or lower. So physically, the hypothalamus is going to be under the thalamus. And the hypothalamus maintains internal body equilibrium, regulates hormone levels, and controls the pituitary gland. And hormones and pituitary gland, that's something we'll cover in the endocrine system later on. Okay, well, the midbrain looks kind of empty and sad. That's because we don't have really too much to talk about it. But the midbrain, we need to know that it's located under the thalamus, which we just talked about right now. And also, it does take in information from certain ear and eye nerves. So that's the midbrain, and that's because we need to move on to the hindbrain. Woo, hindbrain. So that's actually my favorite part of the brain. And that's because we got the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is responsible for voluntary motor movements. So how I'm moving my arms, how I'm walking around, that's voluntary. I'm all choosing to move like that. And we're actually going to take our Play-Doh back out. So Play-Doh is making back its appearance. Go ahead and take another color. I'm going to be using orange in this case. So Play-Doh, let's make our appearance. And our cerebellum is actually going to go underneath our occipital lobe. It's going to go beside our temporal lobe like that. And that is our cerebellum. And we got our little label for cerebellum, and we can stick it right in here. So now we've started working in the hindbrain. We've got the forebrain, midbrain done.
I want to make a pig.
We're not making pigs. We're making a cerebellum.
It's not allowed.
It kind of looks like it. Let's be real. The pituitary gland kind of does too.
Alright, okay.
Or like,
Everyone got their cerebellum ready to go?
Come on, stick it in. Stick it in.
Oh.
You got your cerebellum there, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the pons. So this one you don't have to worry about, but it's important because it roughly translates in English to bridge, and that's because it bridges the cerebellum with the medulla oblongata, which I also love saying. It's an awesome word to say. And that's the next part that we'll be covering in our Play-Doh. So the medulla oblongata regulates your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your autonomic nervous system, which is something we'll be covering in more detail in next class. And the pons and medulla oblongata are actually part of something what we call the brain stem. So as you can see here in our diagram, pons and medulla, they're actually kind of together, and that's because the pons connects the cerebellum to the medulla in the brain stem. And the brain stem does eventually become the spinal cord, which you'll remember earlier on in our lesson, that it's one of the other major organs of the central nervous system. So what we're going to do first, we're going to kind of do this out of order. Go ahead and take another Play-Doh color. I'm taking brown in this case. And we're actually going to take our Play-Doh and just kind of roll it into this nice log here. Into this log here. Yeah.
Log.
Guys, let's focus. And we want to take that bottom part of that log and actually just kind of shape it into something skinnier than the rest of the log. And that's going to be your spinal cord. As you can see, it kind of thins out from the brain stem. And then you want to take your log-ish looking brain stem and then put it right here. I'm kind of out of space here. And also you want to watch out that it just kind of doesn't fall off. You guys have bigger plates here. So you want to make sure that it kind of sticks out like that. And then leave a space here so that we can have the space for the medulla oblongata afterwards. So go ahead and place the spinal cord information right here.
Beautiful.
And then we have our final part. Let's go ahead and grab the other color.
What other color?
And you want that medulla oblongata to be a little bit smaller here like that.
Oh, yeah.
So just make a small little ball like that because it's going to be just going between the temporal lobe, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. It just kind of goes in like that. Boom. And then that's our medulla oblongata.
Nice.
And there you go. You had your own very brain model. Congratulations, guys. Did you guys get all of that, by the way?
Yes.
Yes? Awesome. So what I want you guys to do right now is just make sure you sanitize your hands first. And also make sure that everyone sanitize your hands. And then go ahead and take a picture of your brain model because we're going to use it for later on in our other lessons. And then make sure you put everything back into the boxes. I'll take them away from you. And then we'll be talking next about the presentation. You guys need to work together as a group for your summative assessments.
Ooh.
Thank